the amazing, the stupendous, the after party. I'm no white guilt. And with me is the greatest of orders. The Honors Roll Call highlights and celebrates those who have conscientiously committed to monthly gifts in my work for White Wellbeing. And appearing on the All-Stars portion of the Honors Roll Call today is Mrs. Jess Horst, our very own. Thank you very much, dear lady. And those remaining on the Honors Roll Call are Kokubek, Scott, Jessica, and Promethean Epoch. I warmly thank you all for your courageous support of White Wellbeing. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are not one of them, thank them. Folks, HB 2014 is a video highlights wizard extraordinaire. If you are not following him on Twitter at _HB2014, you should do so immediately and help to spread the stellar clips he makes. Let's make HB a Twitter titan. If you appreciate the work I'm doing for White Wellbeing, please consider becoming a monthly gift giver. The more you gift, the less time I have to spend at my day job, the more time I can dedicate to White Wellbeing. And now, as for the crown winner of last week, the crown goes to our very own Syrup for gifting $14.89. Thank you very much. Congratulations, my dear brother, doing double duty. And in second place there was no second place. There was one financial gift, and we will give second place to Syrup as well. Thank you so much. Financially gift here on Entropy at 15%, which will be up in one moment, where you can watch the stream, ask and vote on questions, and I'll possibly get a poll in there tonight, especially since Mark's always able to get one on. And you could turn to Cash App at 6%. Jared and I, as you all know, evenly share the financial gifts with our guests here on the After Party. Now, today on tap is the man who puts love in Love Stream, the world-renowned Mark Collett. And today we are going to be talking to him about a great many things, not the least of which is the meteoric rise of Patriotic Alternative. Mark, how are you doing? Please let the folks know a bit about yourself. If they haven't heard of you before, I would be amazed. But we have a lot of new people coming to the community. So anything you'd like to say about yourself to get started, and then we'll turn it over to Jared.
Well, firstly, this isn't my regular haircut. This is what I call my lockdown haircut, because I can't get a proper haircut. I think I have to make that clear. Some people thought I was making a very radical statement by shaving it all off, but no, I just can't go to the barbers because none are open. But most people will know me, and for those who don't, my name is Mark Collett. I am a long-time nationalist activist. I have written a book called The Fall of Western Man. You can download that for free at www.fallofwesternman.com. And I helped to form Patriotic Alternative, which is a group that advocates for the rights and the well-being of the indigenous people of the British Isles and for those of European descent all over the world. And I run that group with a dedicated team of people, not least the lovely Laura Towler, who is the deputy leader of the organization. We have our own website, which you can find at www.patrioticalternative.org.uk. We hold conferences, we hold numerous real-life events, camps, sporting events, fitness events, dinners, all sorts. And it is a place where people like us can come together, express themselves, speak freely, and meet like-minded people. We are building a community for change, and hopefully, if we are successful with that, one day we will go on to contest elections and try to win some form of power in order to turn around this demographic shift which threatens us with extinction.
Well, hello, Mark. It's nice to see you again, as always. Everyone, please do like and share this stream. You know that we're under constant attack and throttling and all that bad stuff. And as I like to say, we have to beat the algorithm. But we're going to talk about a lot today because there's a lot of energy obviously emanating from the UK right now. And this man here has a lot to do with it. So we're going to talk about all the growth and good things. We're also going to talk about some of the challenges as you start to grow, of course. You become more of a target. But first, Mark, let's just start generally about why you set the table as to why you think more people are coming specifically to ethnic nationalism. We know this term nationalism is broad and it means different things to some different people, which I want to get into in a moment, outreach. But just generally, however you see fit to address that question about why the tide is turning and why we're seeing an energy towards people coming to an specifically ethnic form of nationalism and what we advocate for?
Well, for many years, people like myself and nationalists in Britain and all over the world, all over the Western world, have stated unequivocally that we, people of European descent, are going to become minorities in our homelands, whether that be our ancestral homelands or the places our forefathers colonized and turned into homelands. So we will be a minority all over Western Europe. We'll be a minority in Australia. We're already on the back foot in South Africa, massively so, and we are rapidly becoming a minority in places like Canada and America. And for years, we have been saying this. I've been saying this for 20 years, and there's people who've been doing it for a lot longer than I have. And the British public specifically didn't really seem to want to wake up to this issue. They seem to have sleepwalked into this demographic nightmare. However, in the last few years, this has become unavoidable. People can no longer ignore it. It's in their face. And the way the media have covered it is very, very interesting. At first, the media laughed at people who talked about the Great Replacement, who talked about this demographic shift. They laughed at us. They mocked us. Then the media were very angry and they started shouting at us and saying, these people, they're spreading dangerous conspiracy theories. So from laughter to anger. Then the media claimed, well, these things might be happening, but we just have to accept it. So we go from laughter to anger to acceptance. And finally, the media is moving into the final stage, or what I believe will be its final stage of discussing it, which is celebration. The media now are saying, yes, it is happening. They're admitting it's happening, because at first they laughed at us and denied it. Then they denied it and called us conspiracy theorists. Then they accepted it and claimed it was happening, but it was inevitable and it was natural. And now, finally, not only have they accepted it, but they're celebrating it and saying, well, this demographic change is happening and we have to celebrate it and we have to embrace it. Because not only is it natural, and we said that when we accepted it, but it's actually a good thing and it's enriching us and it's making life better. And the public have had a very interesting reaction to it, because at first the public didn't know what to make of it. The press, the media, the establishment, they were laughing at these crazy people like myself who were talking about this demographic replacement. Then we were labeled conspiracy theorists, and the public were told, don't just laugh at these people, but they have to be ignored. They have to be silenced. You know, it's a dangerous lie that could lead to all kinds of civil unrest. But now the public are saying, well, first you laughed, then you told us it was a dangerous lie, but now you're telling us not only is it actually happening, which is what these guys said all along, but we should embrace it, because somehow turning into a minority in your own homeland is meant to be a good thing now. And I think that this is something that the public are now acutely aware of. And the vast majority of people of European descent do not want to become a minority in their homelands. They don't want to see their children and their grandchildren be minorities. And the reason they don't want that is because us becoming a minority is very much linked to something else. And that something else is the anti-white rhetoric. Whereas every other minority in Western nations is put on a pedestal, treated as first-class citizens, given special protections, giving special funding, allowed community centers, given all kinds of special statuses to protect them and to ensure that they hold on to their culture and their rights. As we become a minority, we aren't privy to any of that. We aren't the recipients of any special treatment whatsoever. In fact, as we're becoming a minority, we are treated in the worst way imaginable. We're treated in such a terrible way that you can see that although we often refer to ourselves as becoming second-class citizens, it's worse than that. We're worse than second-class citizens. In fact, we are being treated already in many parts of the country like an underclass, like not just second-class citizens, but almost as if we are subhuman. And the treatment we're being exposed to isn't just a lack of funding. It's not just a lack of community centers. They're not just denying that we exist. but they are actively covering up. When I say they, I'm talking about the establishment, the media, the police, the whole system are actively covering up the most horrendous crimes against people of European descent, all in the name of community cohesion and diversity. And I think the public are getting onto this now. The public understand. The public understand that this isn't just a few people coming in, that this isn't just a guy who runs the local takeaway and another guy at the corner shop and maybe a couple of people working at cab stands. This is a vast movement of people who are replacing us. And to put this into perspective, just in the last few days, it's emerged that whilst we're all on lockdown, whilst we are quarantined in our own homes under this draconian legislation, 15,000 migrants per day are pouring into Britain. And this is all taking place under a so-called conservative government. And that is a government that pledged to have a points-based immigration system in order to prevent unskilled workers flooding into Britain. Yet migration levels at the moment are the highest they've ever been in British history.
Let me just jump in really quickly because and I'll throw it right back to you, Jared. Very well said, Mark. And this is something that I just don't want to slide, but so it's too easy for it to allow this point to just slide. But it's very sapient of Mark and what he's saying here, that we have been saying, and especially for those of us, those of you out there who are either brand new, watching live right now, or who be watching this in replay, people in our white positive sphere over decades now, many decades, have been saying that these exact things were going to happen, that the anti-whites, this is exactly what they intended, irrespective of the pretexts that they gave to us. This is exactly what would happen. This is exactly what the results would be, to not project who and what we are into those other peoples coming into our lands, that they would, those new people coming into our lands, that they would behave as best they could in accord with what we consider by basis of our biosphere to be normal. And that once, and we in Going Free talk about that here, that that's because they are in a position of numerical diffidence, but that once they reach a position of numerical courage, then they will begin acting out. They didn't have this vocabulary before us, but now we do. Once they have numerical courage, they will begin acting out their biospirit. So these are predictions come true. Who are you going to believe? If you are in this sphere and you're trying to help others, if you're going free and you're trying to help others, this is one of the most powerful things that you can share. You don't need a crystal ball. Mark doesn't have one. When I was in the UK, he didn't say, Jason, let me show you, this is how I'm able to see the future. I didn't pull one out of my pocket to show him how I'm able to see the future. We have merely understood, analyzed the anti-white mind, analyzed what their objectives are. We were able to retro-dict based on that understanding. We are able to predict based on that understanding. Those before us were able to do the same. And each generation of those in the white positive sphere have grown up on the shoulders of those who came before in their ability to understand and interpret the anti-whites and what they're up to. And now we have reached as damn near as you can get to perfection, understanding them and their objectives, these victimizers. So this is something you need to keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, especially those of you who are brand new. The conservatives, the basic bitch nationalists and all of this, they can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. All they can talk about is all they can do is scratch their heads and say, well, we don't understand what these anti-whites, they just don't make any. Well, they'll call them by the names of their taking. They'll call them progressives. They'll call them cherubs from heaven. Whatever names the anti-whites want to be called, these fools will call them these things. So they will say to you, if you're heeding these misleaders, these misrulers, they will say, well, it's so confusing. These people are not fair. We should all just stare at each other in dismay over how unjust they are. But over here in the white positive sphere, with the work that we are doing, Mr. George, myself, Mark Collett is doing, Patriotic Alternative is doing, we can clearly tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. We've been able to tell you what has happened in the past. There are records of all of this. You can go back and watch the oldest videos. You can go back and read the oldest books all the way up to now. So this is an absolutely critical point that folks need to understand. Share it if you're trying to help people go free. And if you're brand new, stick around and you'll learn how to tell the future as well. So brilliantly said, very sapient, Mark, and I'll pass it over to Jared for what he was about to say.
Well, we were tagged as Mark was talking about that. I just put this link in the YouTube chat. We were tagged in these tweets that mentioned, among other victims, Richard Everett, who was stabbed for being white when he was 15 in the UK. And actually, the tweet is from someone saying that he's Richard's brother, and sharing some information about that. Amazing to get that and see that come up just as Mark is talking about it. Also, we have to keep in mind, and I know all of you know this, anyone who's listening regularly, we can never lose sight of the fact that the media and our education are complicit in this. They have changed the perception of many people out there and implicitly made it okay to attack us and make us this underclass that Mark is speaking of. That is something we can never forget, and they will be held responsible. So, Mark, as we know, basically what you're describing is there's two trajectories that are crossing paths. There are people who are sensitive to this early, like us, and certainly many who well before us. And now it's becoming more apparent to the greater masses of people out there. So what I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on next then is the fact that even as people are seeing the effects of this more and more in their day-to-day lives and the anti-white rhetoric and media and schools, there's still a tremendously ingrained taboo about advocating for your peoplehood in an essential way like we do. So what are some of your thoughts, as I'm sure you're seeing with the work you're doing with PA? We're getting, as I was indicating earlier, more people who were nationalists of a different stripe, who were not explicitly ethno-nationalists, and they're now wading into our area. They're a little more amenable to it. But what do you think is the best way to outreach to these people who are still skittish about that taboo? They have all this programming about that taboo of ethnic nationalism.
Well, a lot of the people who we refer to as civic nationalists, the problems that they discuss are all products of mass immigration. They're products of the demographic shift that we talk about. And really, we have to put things in order for these people. And let me furnish you with a small analogy. If you're on a boat and the boat is taking on water because it's got a huge crack in its hull, and you're standing in the boat and your feet are wet, your shoes are wet through, your socks are soaking, and your toes are starting to get cold, what do you have to do? How do you go about solving that problem? Well, if you were a complete fool, you would stand on a stool, take your shoes and socks off, dry your feet, wring out your socks, and attempt to dry your shoes off. As more water came in and the water rose, and eventually it wouldn't matter that you were on a stool, would it? Because your feet would be wet all over again, and the problem isn't being solved. Now, the first thing you would do, before you even thought about your cold toes or your wet shoes or your soggy socks, was to try and seal the hole in the hull. And once you'd sealed the hole in the hull, you still wouldn't be worrying about your socks and your shoes. You would then begin to pump the water that was in the boat back out of the boat. And once you'd solved things in that logical order, you would then sit back and think about drying your shoes off, getting your feet nice and warm, and making sure your socks were on the radiator so they were no longer soggy. And when you look at civnats are very much people that spend a lot of time talking about drying their shoes, warming their feet, and putting their socks on the radiator, but don't really want to tackle the hole in the hull properly, and certainly won't want to do anything about pumping the water out of the boat. And as such, these civnat leaders who are talking about soggy toes soon start to run out of good grace with their followers, who are saying, come on guys, if you're worried about your toes getting cold, we need to get the hull sealed and the water out of the boat first. And that is the way we need to deal with this. We need to realign the thinking of people at the grassroots of the civic nationalist movement and tell them that the reason they are facing these social and cultural problems, the reason they are facing grooming gangs, anti-white racist attacks, the reason they're facing falling wages, the reason they're facing anti-white racism and positive discrimination, which means you losing your job to somebody less qualified than you just because that somebody happens to be of what is now ethnic minority descent, but rapidly moving towards being a majority. You're facing all of these problems because we have let in huge numbers of migrants. But not only have we let in huge numbers of migrants, those migrants breed at a much more rapid rate than we do. So we're becoming a minority. And we need to not only stop immigration, and I'm not just talking about stopping illegal immigration, we need to stop all immigration, because this CivNat nonsense of legal immigration only, well, I can tell you this. Every single one of the Muslims in towns like Rotherham, towns like Telford, places like South Manchester, who were abusing young white girls, who were sexually assaulting, who were grooming, sexually assaulting, raping, trafficking, and in some case murdering young white girls. Those people hold British passports. They are legal immigrants. They are here legally. And according to this system, those men and the women that assisted them are as British as Yorkshire pudding, apple pie, and fish and chips. And that is a nonsense. The fact of the matter is, a piece of paper or a little maroon booklet with your picture in it doesn't change who you are. So we need to tackle all immigration. But having people in your nation who do things like that to your children, who target young white people, whether it be for grooming, whether it be for racial attacks, we don't want them in our nation. And we don't want to spend millions and millions of pounds setting up community centres. We don't want to spend millions and millions of pounds setting up special education centres or building them parks or sending them to Alton Towers for Americans. That's our best theme park. We're sending them to Alton Towers for the weekend to ride Nemesis. We don't want to do that. We want to send them elsewhere. We want to send them to other parts of the world where they can carry out their culture, where they can live in the kind of society they want to live in, which isn't the kind of society that we want to live in. So not only do we want to seal the hull, but we want to get the water out of the boat. And there's another huge lie that these people will throw at us. There's this other huge lie that people, my detractors, like to attack me with. Well, Mark, it's only the Muslims. But it isn't, is it? We've seen a huge rise in knife crime, machete attacks, female genital mutilation, murders of children under the banner of witchcraft or voodoo. We've seen a huge rise in sexual assaults, all coming from migration that has come out of Africa that has nothing to do with Islam. We have seen the meteoric rise in the abuse of children within the African community. London has become a war zone. This isn't just about Islam. And my detractors will say, oh, Mark's an apologist for Islam. No, I simply say it's not all about Islam. And then these people will say, oh, but what about those from the Indian subcontinent? You only have to do a cursory Google search to discover just how much sexual abuse and sexual harassment takes place all over India, and not from the Muslim community. These people from elsewhere in the world have different cultures, different ways of life, a different mindset to us. So the best place for them isn't living on the same streets and in the same towns and in the same cities. It's living in their nations where they can do as they please. But in that sense, we can do as we please, and our children and our people can be safe. And my detractors, the people who like to claim it's only about Islam, that we can bring people in, we can educate them, we can turn them into brilliant British people. Why? Why even talk like that? We have millions of people on some form of benefit. We have millions of young people who we can train to do jobs here in the UK. We have millions of people that we could invest that money into. Why spend millions and millions, billions even, bringing people here from all over the world and attempting to civilize them and turn them into us for some mad CivNat scheme, or to prove that we're not racist, when we could just invest that money in our next generation and give them the start they deserve?
And it's much cleaner for the land too, for all those environmental types. They want to keep that beautiful island green and good. I don't want to go back to England and see smog and tower blocks on the countryside. I remember standing in the countryside and just mouth agape at how unreasonably gorgeous your country is. I love it, and I want to see it that way. I live in a gorgeous part of the States myself. I want to see all of it sustained and better for the future generations. Let's talk about some fun stuff. The groyping, all that energy, a lot of young people coming in and forcing those sitting on the fence, taking the fight to the civic nationalist types and actually going after people who call themselves conservatives, different media outlets, radio shows. How do you see that playing into all of this? What have been your observations about that?
I think the groypers are doing a fantastic job, and I think they make this fun. Now, I was talking to Millennial Woes about this, and I was saying one thing at the moment that is very fun about nationalism, is very fun about ethno-nationalism, about our group, about Patriotic Alternative, is everyone is smiling. Everyone's enjoying themselves. Everyone's out there doing something that's fun. And at the same time, they are running rings round our political adversaries and making them look like fools. And I think politics should be fun. I think doing what we're doing shouldn't be a slog. If it becomes a slog, it's going to put people off. And it's very, very interesting to see all these call-in shows now screening their callers, seeing so many people getting banned on different YouTube streams. And all of this is happening because these people fear us. Now, I'll debate anyone. People know that. I've debated people from all sides of the political spectrum. But every time I take on one of these civic nationalists, I leave them basically as gibbering wrecks, and they can't get a salient point out, because ultimately, one of the things that ensures our victory, and it ensures the victory of any radical group, any group that wants genuine change, is we actually have an underlying ideology. We have something that we're working towards. Whereas civic nationalists don't really have any ideology. They have a loose approximation of a belief system, but that belief system has been shaped so much by those who want to defeat them. It's been shaped so much by their enemies in the media that they always end up in a real state. They always end up trying to form a compromise with those who can't be compromised with. And that's why they lose. And that's why the civic nationalists are losing both to us, and that's why they've always lost to the left. Because you cannot compromise with those who want to destroy you. And we haven't compromised. One thing about Patriotic Alternative is we are a genuine free speech group. We're a group where you can come to our events, and as long as you don't break our 3 rules, you can pretty much say what you want, and you can be yourself. Whereas at the moment in the civic nationalist movement, there's somewhat of a Spanish Inquisition. People going around trying to find out who's really saying things that sound a little bit too much like the kind of things that Mark Collett says. And it's hilarious to see this happen. I've seen people kicked out of groups. I've heard of people banned from streams who at one time were huge supporters of civic nationalists, but just dared to say, well, I think my area is getting a little bit multicultural. What do you mean by that? Are you talking about demographics? Demographics is our issue, mate. You better shut your mouth. Whereas we're not like that. And what's more, we're a lot more friendly. And when people come to our events, when people who were once civic nationalists come to our events, they see that everything they've been told about us isn't true, and that we're actually a welcoming community who holds our hands out, and we are very, very open. We're very, very welcoming. And people who come into our fold feel much, much more at home than they ever did as part of the civic nationalist movement, which often is filled with some very, very unsavory and hostile people.
Do you have a few quick notes or points when our people are debating, talking to civic nationalists in their lives, what some of the key weak points are, where you go for, how you leave them gibbering wrecks?
It depends on who I'm debating, and it depends. And sometimes I watch other people debating, and I see the civnat say something, and I just think, gosh, I wish I could just be there now, because I tend to see what people say, and because civic nationalism has so many holes in it, it's so easy to go at people who are espousing those views. And I see people also amongst the civic nationalists, there's also a sense of desperation. And what I mean by that is that they're desperate to think they're winning. They're desperate. You see, I'm not. I've spent a long time realizing that ethno-nationalism isn't on top, that we are rapidly becoming a minority in our ancestral homeland. I've come to terms with that, and I'm honest about that. But civic nationalists always seem to want to fool themselves into believing that they're somehow winning. So when the Conservatives get in, they're like, well, we've done it, haven't we, guys? Boris is in. He's promised us a points-based immigration system. And then Boris lets in 15,000 migrants a day. And all of a sudden, they're not winning because they were fooling themselves. And when you fool yourself, when you lie to yourself, and when you try to justify those lies and your nonsensical position, which is based on some weak belief that you have to personally think that you're winning at all times, it's so easy to pull these people apart. It's so easy to deconstruct them. And I don't believe that I'm the most incisive person alive. I don't believe I'm the best at debate. I don't talk of myself as if I'm some sort of unstoppable person. It's just, I do have logic on my side. I'm reasonably quick-witted and I have logic on my side. And when you have logic on your side, and when you're dealing with people who are deluding themselves, it just makes the whole process far easier than it really should be.
I want to talk a little bit more about the counterculture feeling that is emanating right now and going on in Britain. What is, how do you think things feel different in the scene now than they did when you began about 20 years ago? What's been the general trajectory? Have you seen things change in your time being active in all this?
I've seen lots of different waves of nationalism, but what I've never seen people do things as Patriotic Alternative is doing things. I've never seen people be both smart, articulate, and unashamed. Those things tend to never go hand in hand. The people who are unashamed tend not to be smart and articulate. And the people who tend to be smart and articulate tend to either overthink things and intellectualize things beyond the reach of normal people, or they believe that they can clothe themselves in something that isn't really them, which later down the line leads to their undoing. And I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again now. I don't always get things right, but I'm not dishonest. And I believe that one of the biggest failings, some of the biggest failings of nationalism, I'm going to list them. These are just a scattershot of the failings of nationalism in the past. And I'll give you an example from the British National Party days. When I first joined the British National Party, I remember going to a meeting in Leeds, and I arrived there, and a friend of mine was running the bookstore. Now, at British National Party meetings, there was always the bookstall and there was the bookstall. And the bookstall was on the table, but the bookstall was under the table. And this was how the British National Party dealt with things. They sold books which were for new people arriving at the meeting to buy and educate themselves. And then they sold books under the table, which were a little bit more, how can we say it, edgy. Now, this seemed like a good idea. Let's cloak ourselves in this veneer of respectability, in this veneer of, well, we don't sell that kind of books, but we really do. And that was actually more damaging than it was helpful, because you want your members and your supporters to know, to embrace knowledge. But if you're hiding the knowledge that you're embracing, you're only getting yourself ready for a greater fall down the line, because the veneer of respectability that you have painted all over yourself soon looks disingenuous when a journalist turns up at your meeting and shows people the book table, but then shows them the book table. And at that point, everything that you did not only falls by the wayside, but you're also painted as a liar. You're also painted as dishonest. You're painted as a group that say one thing, but secretly think another. And that is far more damaging than being open about something that's unpalatable. If you believe something that doesn't necessarily go along with the current political narrative, or you believe something that's slightly unpopular or might not be the greatest position to take from a point of optics, if you actually believe that, in a very real sense, it's better to own it than it is to hide it and be exposed as being dishonest. Now, there is a massive debate about this, but that was one of the major problems with the British National Party. We were always trying to hide some of the things that we believed. And that led us into a position of contradiction. It led us into several large exposés of the other book table. And it turned us really into a group that looked as if we were a wolf in sheep's clothing to a degree. That was damaging. And I believe that if you are honest about the things you're interested in, but you put them over in a reasoned, professional, and articulate manner, it is better to die on your hill as an honest person than it is to die on somebody else's hill, wearing their clothes, not even being the person that you are. And I think nationalism has made several mistakes in the past. Now, that doesn't mean we should abandon optics. We should always be smart. We should always be articulate. We should always use guerrilla politics. Another big failing of the nationalist movement is announcing its every event, its every movement, the place it will hold its rally, only to get into violence. And we need to avoid violence. We need to avoid thuggery. We need to avoid people who aren't professional, who aren't putting over the best image, but at the same time hiding your actual opinions, hiding the fact that we are interested in race realism, that we are interested in demographics, that we are interested in alternative narratives, ultimately only backfires upon you. And I think we are striking a good balance, and I think we are also doing something that makes people feel at home. For so long, I have met so many nationalists who can't articulate themselves at work, at home, with their friends. Now, when you come to one of our events, do you want to sit there biting your tongue and not articulating yourself to keep up some facade? No, we want to be ourselves. But when we are ourselves, we should do it in the most professional and attractive manner possible. And I personally believe that we are living in a time of huge narrative shift. And every revolutionary group that went on to change the world, at one point, their opinions were taboo. But eventually those taboos broke through and became mainstream. And we have to have the courage of our convictions. We have to be willing and able to be unpopular in certain quarters in the short term, but we must always stick to our guns. And we must remember, we are not simply trying to nudge and essentially shift the mainstream or influence the mainstream. We are here to smash the mainstream and replace it with nationalism.
Very well said, good brother. And that's one of the messages that a lot of people have to hear, because there are a lot of disagreements about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and where and when are these X, Y, or Z acceptable. So it's an ongoing debate, and those are some important foundations, those points, important foundations that need to be laid for that discussion. Now, we don't have any financial gifts yet. You can financially gift on the link. If you refresh your screen, you will see it now in the description for the Entropy on Gardening with NWG. That's the link to use if you want to get over to Entropy and watch the stream, ask questions in the question widget, or financially gift. And of course, there is also Cash App that is available. The link is also in the description. But we do have some questions in the question widget, which I will read the first one from Iron Blood, and then I think the rest of them are for Mark. So get ready, Mark. And the first question, I think to me, it looks like, is Iron Blood asking, Jason, what was going on during the Duke stream? Why were you wearing a white shirt and a white tie? I was screaming, look how they massacred my boy. Well, I was asked about, I think some villain in one of these movies that mostly children watch, but some adults find it interesting as well. Wore a white shirt and a white tie, and somebody asked if that would be if I could do something like that in the previous week's show in the live chat. And I had worn before the white shirt at work, white shirt with the off-white or antique white tie, and I thought it was a good combo, so that's why I decided to wear it. And I got quite a few compliments from it, but there was no other meaning other than a style. Iron Blood also asked, this one is for Mark, the first of several questions we have here for you, Mark. Iron Blood asking, since it's Ramadan, do you think the government will use Muslim workers to guilt the natives by saying, quote, you lazy whites are home while these poor Muslims are starving yet picking up food for you, close quote?
Well, I did a whole stream on the lockdown last Friday, and people were very happy with it, actually, because I've been having a lot of people complimenting me because I have got a lot of things right about the lockdown. I did say from very early on, figures were being exaggerated in terms of mortality rate. I did say from early on that I believe the narrative would shift to a pro-migration narrative. And I also that sooner or later you would start to see people being shamed in newspapers or on social media for not clapping loud enough for the NHS. And I've been proved right on all of those things. And I believe at the end of this, the net effect will be a loss of our liberties, many elderly white people dead, because they're actually covering up how many elderly whites are dead, and they're making it look like more minorities are dying. So it's going to be lots of elderly white people dead, but minorities will get the vast majority of the sympathy. Minorities will be put forward as our saviors because they came to pick the fruit, they came to help us out. The message will be lazy Brits didn't want the jobs even though they've been turned down. And people will say the NHS that rescued us through this dark time, the NHS were ultimately a migrant group. It was the migrants in the NHS that rescued us. So this will be twisted into a pro-open border event, even though it was open borders that brought it here, even though it was mass immigration and globalism that brought the disease here, even though it was a bumbling government that allowed it to spread so rapidly. What we will see is, again, a pro-migration and replacement narrative following on from this, where people are not wanting to close the borders, but spreading the message that we should be clapping for migrants and they should be coming here in even greater numbers to replace those who died and worshipped almost for being the ones that can rebuild Britain. So mark my words, that will be the final narrative from the media and the establishment.
I do think people should also look up the malpractice numbers, the ratios of the non-white population to those. We'll leave it to you to do your own research.
Yes. Please do, ladies and gentlemen. It's eye-opening for those who are interested in having their eyes thrown open. So let's see, what else do we have here? We have on the question widget, this is Never Be Blackpilled asking, has Mark, and this is going to be an easy, I guess, yes or no, unless you have something to tack on, and then we have a question with a little bit more meat to it. Has Mark ever spoken with Duke of Durham before?
I have met him in person, actually. He's a really nice guy.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mestizo asking, hello, Tap, and hello, Mark. Speaking of CivNats, what are your thoughts on Hunter, is this Avallone, is that Italian? Quote, leaving the right video. Hunter Avallone, leaving the right video.
I might have seen this. I might have not. I can't really say. If somebody wants to send it to me, I could give my thoughts. I might have even given my thoughts. I've got to apologize here to a degree because a lot of people send me a lot of links per day. So I might get a couple of dozen emails every morning on really busy days. The busiest day ever, I've had over 100 emails in a single day. And a lot of these emails contain things that people want me to look over. Now, I try to look over everything, but occasionally I look over something and forget it or don't have time to watch a particular 2-hour-long video. So if I have seen this and have forgotten about it, my apologies, but it doesn't immediately ring a bell.
What about the meat of that question, or the substance rather of the question, that those who are in the white positive sphere, or I guess people who are on the right, I don't really believe in the spectrum, but people who are on the right in the spectrum, they'll refer to themselves as that, who are here and then for whatever reason, what happens to them? Because we know that you can't see truth and then unsee it. So what do you think is happening? I mean, personally, I would just maybe get you started on the track with a lot of these people have a lot of personal issues, and then that's why they're headed out. We saw this with somebody I was just Matthew Heimbach talking about recently, as somebody who is a self-promoter egoist. So what happens to folks when they do leave truth and then they kind of disappear and they seek some transitory, some ephemeral fame from the anti-whites in power?
They go to their own personal hell. A place where they have to wrestle with their conscience.
Yeah.
A place where they have to spend a long period of time wrestling with the fact that they know what the fate of the West is on its current trajectory, and that they know they once stood on the side of right and truth, but they sold that out for an easy life. And I'm not one for making sort of using Hollywood films as analogies, but the best analogy of this is obviously The Matrix, where Cypher goes to meet the agents and they have steak with him, and he holds up this beautiful sort of morsel of steak and it looks amazing, and he says, I know that the steak doesn't exist, but, and he puts it in his mouth and he says, it tastes great. And he knows the steak is just a lie. He knows it's computer code. He knows that it's all in his mind, but he would rather go back into the Matrix. He would rather essentially live out his days living a lie, a comfortable lie, than face the uncomfortable truth and struggle to bring about a better world. And I suppose there was lots of layering in the Matrix, because the idea of the Matrix was you were in a very comfortable prison. This prison that you were in was an illusion, and it was an illusion of comfort. And when you broke out of the prison and you attempted to achieve freedom, the freedom on the other side of the prison walls was actually, in many ways, a lot harsher on people than staying in the Matrix. In fact, if you stayed in the Matrix, you had everything provided for you, you lived out your days in what you believed to be comfortable freedom. But if you broke free, you lived out your days in an underground bunker, the only place still warm enough to live because it was closer to the center of the earth, and you scavenged and you ate this horrible stuff that just looked like slop in a pan, but you were free. And I think some people seek freedom, but with the quest for freedom comes not only responsibility, but often comes sacrifice and hardship. And I think weak people find it very difficult to shoulder sacrifice and hardship, and would rather hand their freedom back. They'd rather be a caged bird in a warm cage, but still in a cage, than be a bird that flies free, but has to deal with the elements and the other hardships of the outside world. And there is another side to this, though. The problem is the cage we're living in is only safe and warm for so long.
Yeah.
The cage is getting a lot messier, a lot darker, a lot colder, and a lot more dangerous. And for anyone thinking of going back to the cage, it's only a matter of time until you end up in a position where you might regret turning your back on your comrades, because white flight and pretending this isn't happening can only go on for so much longer. And when we say so much longer, that is no longer an indefinite period. That is no longer a period that is hundreds of years away. In Britain, it's around 40 years away. In the US, it's less than that. And I think we all know that ultimately, although the quest for freedom can often be hard and involve much personal sacrifice, freedom really is something you cannot put a price upon.
Amen to that. We have do have a financial gift from Zero Talent coming in here over on Cash App, $5, writing greetings to our brothers in the West, brothers of the West. Greetings to our brothers of the West in the East. Thank you so much for that. Yes, indeed. We are united by the biospirit with all of our brothers wherever they are on planet Earth, including Eastern Europe, some of the best of our heroes, to be sure. And one other question here by BP, and I think this is both for Mark and myself, asking about having Horus on the shows. Now, is it Horus as in Horus who appears with Simon, or is it Horus the Avenger of Tim Murdoch fame? Which Horus are you talking about? We'll have either over here, and I assume that Mark will be open to entertaining thoughts of guests as well. Mark?
Well, we've already had Horus on, but next week we've got the Iconoclast. We've got Dan on the show, which is very good. And I've actually forgotten who's on the week after. No, the week after we've got Unwashed. And then I'm going to be talking to Gavin Bobby, the Mosque Buster, who's coming on the show. We do have a number of good guests. Horus and Simon Harris have invited me on their show in the near future, so I'm looking forward to that. But obviously, they're both welcome on the show. And the problem with sort of success, so to speak, or having a successful show, especially a successful show that only is a weekly show, is there are far more quality guests now than there are spots on the show. And that's both a good and bad thing. But one great thing about our movement is there are so many people doing so many quality streams, and there's such a wonderful community of different shows happening all the time, that there is always a way for new content creators to come up. And we will certainly be having Horus, Simon, and others back on PWR in the future.
We have a clarification. It was, and I look forward to that as well, Mark. We have a clarification from a BP that it was Tim Murdoch, and yeah, we'll have Tim back soon. Yeah, nothing to.
Also, a guy called James Fox Higgins. From Australia. I did an amazing interview with him, and I want to get him on the show. He's a musician. He's a white activist who's passionately a Christian. He's a father. He's a really, really great guy, and he deserves. I mean, there's so many people who've got so many talents, and
yeah,
I would love to do more shows showcasing all of these talented people, because I don't just want to have people from the UK. I don't just want to have people from America. I want people from all over the world, because this is a global struggle for our existence.
Precise. And speaking to guests, and then I'll pass it right back over to Jared so we can keep things rolling right along. Embriel says, it was wonderful of you two gentlemen to invite David Duke on the live stream. He's brilliant and intelligent man. He is indeed, and we were grateful to have him. And we just had a financial gift come in. Damien, 5 British pounds. Thank you very much, dear friend. Hi, all. Question for both sides of the pond. What would be your solution for the Jeremy Kyle bums, the white benefit scoundrels, maybe known as white trash in the U.S., the white people that are embarrassing to whites? So I'm afraid I don't know who that is. Mark, do you know who that is? This Kyle.
The Jeremy Kyle show was a late morning sort of daytime TV show where a presenter basically took a cross section of people from, to politely put it, the lower echelons of British society who had problems. And he did lie detector tests, he did drug tests, he did paternity tests. Mm-hmm. From an American perspective, it was sort of a British Jerry Springer, yeah. Mm-hmm. But it was more about Jeremy Kyle moralizing to these people. Mm. Now, I don't think these people are trash. I think these people are people that need protecting. I think they're people that need looking after. And I made a video recently about usury, and I said that the problem with usury is those who aim these extortionate loans at the British public aim them most squarely at those who are both the poorest and the least able to understand the agreements that they're getting themselves into. And that's very, very dangerous. And I think we have to look at people who have fallen into these traps and not be disrespectful to them, not patronize them, but try to help them out of the problems they're in. And I think we need to give those people direction in their life. And direction used to be given to these people. They used to have pride. They used to have community. They used to have jobs. They used to have industry. They used to be people who were good, honest, monogamous family people. Look at the former mining communities. Look at the former dockers. Look at the former steel workers. These people were the backbone of British society. The only reason they have fallen from grace is because the establishment have taken away their reasons for living. The establishment has taken away their jobs. The establishment has taken away the masculinity of the men in the community. The establishment has taken away the traditional family. It's shattered their communities. And when people are left without purpose, without community, without discipline, without masculinity, they are going to fall from grace. And it is our job not to condescend these people, not to hold them up to ridicule, but to actually help them. And we need to do that by, well, one of the ways we need to do that is to destroy this debt and credit-based society, to smash the economy based on usury and replace it with an economy based on productive enterprise. So these people once again have direction. They once again have pride in what they produce. And once they have those things, we will give them community, tradition. We will let them celebrate their heritage. And these people will be proud people once again. Because you only have to go back to the 1960s and the 1970s, which isn't that long ago, to see that there wasn't any Jeremy Kyle watching, sofa dwelling benefit layabouts in Britain. those people are a product of the establishment who has let them down. And people will say, oh, no, well, it's capitalism, it's freedom of this, it's freedom of that. Well, I'm not really a capitalist. I've said before, I am a nationalist, but I also have a community outlook. If people want to call me a socialist as well, they can. I believe in the NHS. I believe in a benefit system that is there as a safety net, not there as a hammock for people to lounge around in. I believe that our communities deserve investing in. I believe that the people on the lower echelons of society should be protected and pulled up by those at the top, because those at the top are only at the top because those at the bottom are at the bottom, and the whole pyramid should work better for the betterment of everyone in the pyramid. Those at the bottom should be pushing those at the top further up, and those at the top should be pulling those at the bottom further up, so we all advance together as a society, as a community. And we certainly shouldn't be leaving vast numbers of people behind to wallow at the bottom in some pit of usury, misery, debauchery, alcoholism, fast food, and cultureless TV nonsense.
Yeah, well, those kinds of shows, these sententious shows, and that's really how I guess most anti-whites behave, is sententiously, but they're despicable. And I'll briefly say to that, and we have two more financial gifts that have come in just while you were speaking. That what do we do about Jeremy Kyle type of people who are preying upon these not white trash but white victims? Now, that doesn't mean that there are going to be scumbags in the white race. There will be, and we've been known as a people to handle the scumbags in our community roughly. We have not. In fact, the majority of these extra legal, and of course they shouldn't be done, lynchings at any point in time, the majority of those things that took place in the United States were white people snatching up what were believed to be white criminals, and then dealing with them roughly. Now, we should never have lynchings. We should always go through the court of law. But nonetheless, that's been how we actually handle. But when it comes to somebody like a Jeremy Kyle, I would say that we out them as the anti-whites that they are. We reveal the things like what was revealed with Jerry Springer and the rest. Of course, it may not be true. Just ask Susan over there at YouTube whether or not it's true. That people were discovered to be getting paid to make up stories, fabricate stories about the different evil groups that they were in. And back then, it was difficult to communicate to the world. We had these monthly newspapers and things that this was discovered, that this was found out. Now it's not so difficult. In fact, I made a video. I don't think it's available on YouTube anymore, but it is available on my other platforms that demonstrates, what was it, A&E? They were making this Life in the Klan or whatever it was called. May not be true. Ask Susan if it's true and do your own research. But they were outed because the people from these trailer parks that were poor, even though they signed these contracts that absolutely robbed them of their souls, or promised to, if they revealed what was actually happening, of course they went on their social media platform and bragged about how they were getting paid big dollars to participate and pretend like they were Klan members, and that the channel had bought all of the wood and the gasoline and built the crosses and built the other things that they were going to set on fire. And just look that up. Look for my video. It may not be true, of course. We have here, and if Jared wants to add a thought, we'll let him jump in soon.
We have other chats to get to and more questions from Mark. So I don't want to take much time. That is an important question. We could do a whole stream on that. If we are people who want to see the order in things, I mean, I named my whole thing the Great Order, and that's on a social level. You can look at that on a more metaphysical level. But class and caste is a thing, and we need to be realistic about that. We can't just talk about race or ethnicity and deny that, because then you don't know how to answer questions like when people try these gotchas, like, would you rather live next to white people who were like criminals and doing drugs and having loud parties, or would you rather live next to a high IQ, quiet Indian programmer? And those are false questions. And Mark said it beautifully. There's so much to this. But very quickly, yes, they have been exploited. The quote unquote upper class is just as debauched in their own way right now. We need better metaphors, not just high and low. You might see it like those people are the backbone. They do the work. These are people who came from, like Mark mentioned, the miners. farmers as well. These were people whose great-grandfathers, great-great-grandfathers worked the land and built these nations that we have, or we all ate because of them. So we can't disparage the line that they come from. Every class, all the different strata of society have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. They have their ways that can be exploited. What we need, and the kind of nationalism that we're talking about, is seeing the family, the folk, the nation. This is where folk is politics, where like I said, we need a better metaphor than high and low. Like the people who are working the land and doing that work with their hands are like the legs. Would you want to spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair? I'm the type of person that does more mind work, but I'd never disparage the kinds of people that we're talking about. And I have a great feeling of sympathy for them because of the way they've been exploited, the way Mark spoke beautifully to a few moments ago. I don't know about you. I wouldn't want my legs cut off. I don't look down on my legs and my feet. I need them for support. I don't want to spend my life in a wheelchair. So we need to see the body politic as a body. We need to see the nation as a family. So many people are not used to thinking in these terms, and that is what we're trying to change with everything that we're doing. Yeah, more to say on that, but like I said, I'll keep it quick. So
we'll jump
my time.
We'll jump right in because we got two really great questions to hit before we finish up here today. About another 25 minutes or so, folks, and having a great conversation with Mr. Collett, one of our great leaders in the white positive sphere. And real quickly, I'm going to answer a question because Maynard Fritz says he's sitting with a group of people right now watching our show, and he would like a summarization of MPs so that they can understand and how to inoculate. Really can't come back on Going Free 5:30 on Sundays, and we can get more into how to inoculate. But I will read right from Go Free what an MP is. An MP, mean pathogen, is an anti-white precept bolstered by interpretive mandates that produce white noir, which is physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual sickness disease in Western kind. MPs are lesions on our bodies, minds, and spirits. Simplistically, an MP is a belief that is destructive for white people. So it's something you grow up learning about. And a great example of that is that diversity is a wonderful strength in our countries. And you can see that it has proven not to be so. We have 41 BMC, a great participant and hero, financially gifting $10 over on Cash App. Thank you very much, dear friend, in writing. Thanks for another great show. Hail our community. Well, hail back to you. Thank you for that. And we have here Wayne Scully, financially gifting $10 with a question for Mark. It's one of the great two questions we have here lined up. Mark, how can someone in another country copy or model the success you have had with Patriotic Alternative? Do you think making PA members aware of Going Free would be helpful? And how so? Thank you. That's from Wayne Scully.
Well, I think PA members are very, very aware of Going Free, mainly because Jason has been my wingman now for well over 100 episodes of our weekly show. When did you come in? Was it around episode? Patrick came in just before you, and I think you came in around episode
2 years.
2 years. Yeah,
2 years we've been doing it together, and you've obviously been the main guest speaker at the Patriotic Alternative conference earlier this year. So I think everyone's aware of Jason, his fantastic work, his wonderful books, and he has very much been front and center of this movement. Oh, I have to apologize to him today because when we have Dr. David Duke on, no one gets a word in edgeways, and Jason was somewhat sat there for an hour and a half saying not a word. So, but without Patrick there I think David was the most conversational he's ever been, and it was.
Yes, he was.
It was. We've done a lot of amazing shows, but if anyone said to me, pick the best, I have to pick the best. Episode 50 of PWR was the best. Dr. David Duke was at his best. He was as conversational as he's ever been, and the points he raised was incredible. And I believe that stream was shut down because he was doing such an incredible job of pushing back against the anti-white narrative that I don't think YouTube would tolerate a man who is that erudite, who is that skillful at talking speak so freely. And when it did get shut down, it had a 97% plus like rate. So just to put that into perspective, because 3% of people didn't like what was going on that stream, 97% had to miss out on the chat. But if people want to set up something like PA in their own country, it's very, very simple. We started PA meetings in lovely wine bars at lunchtime on a Saturday, getting a group of people together with a dress code, 3 very, very simple rules for the conduct of the people at the meeting. That's grown now to include things such as don't photograph people at the meetings, etc. But 3 simple restrictions on what people could say, a dress code and 3 simple restrictions, and it worked from there. We simply said, come to this lovely wine bar, order a nice meal, sit down, observe these 3 rules: no racial slurs, no endorsement of violence and or terrorism, and no grossly offensive language. And sit there in nice clothes and make polite conversation. And it grew from there. It was as simple as that. It's about building the kind of community that people are comfortable within, and that when they walk into that wine bar or that restaurant, they don't immediately say, oh my gosh, there's the nationalists over there. Because for too long, we as a group have lived up to stereotypes created by the media as a trap for us. We've lived up to these negative stereotypes, and they've done us no favors whatsoever. Now, the fact of the matter is that at that, or at those first PA meetings, when we gathered in those wine bars, I stood with a good friend of mine, with Syrup actually, and I said, have a look over there and tell me what you see. And he looked over there and he said, what do you mean? It's everyone just looks like a group of normal people having dinner. I said, exactly. Anyone could have walked into that wine bar and said, who are those people? Well, it could have been a group of people celebrating a christening. It could have been a group of people celebrating a birthday. It could have been workmates. It could have been friends. It could be members of a book club. But no one would have said, look at those complete freaks. Look at those people who look abnormal or look strange. And by holding events in nice venues, by dressing smartly, and by getting away from using coarse language, racial slurs, or otherwise grossly offensive comments or things that are too edgy, you build a lovely atmosphere that people want to be a part of. And that's why at the last PA event, around 30% of those in attendance were women. Because when you build a positive movement, women want to be involved. And that's what we need to do. And that is something that is a real barometer of success. I remember going to nationalist meetings where there'd be 100, 200 people there, and there might be 1 or 2 women, and those women were the wives or girlfriends of one of the leaders of the movement, or somebody there who was prominent in the community. But normal single women didn't just attend on their own. They are doing now, because we've built a welcoming community, and we need to continue building that welcoming community. We need to do that all over the world. But it's not some witchcraft. It's not some special concoction that you need a degree in chemistry to recreate. It's simply a very, very simple rule. Do things that would be attractive to normal people. No one at our event said, well, we better not come there because the ideas will be too fruity. But they didn't want to be sat next to some smelly, freaky weirdo who came in, shuffling in a dirty old suit, smelling funny, with a Tesco carrier bag full of printed pamphlets about how the lizard men rule the earth. That's not what people want. They want to sit in a nice venue having dinner with people that they feel comfortable around. It's a very easy thing to replicate. And if you want to start local meetings, simply get together with people, use Way of the World's Nat Connect if you're in a different country, or try to find other people in the area. And our first meetings had 15, 20, sometimes 12 people sat at these meetings. Now we have 200 at a conference. It can grow very rapidly because if you have the right people will come. And when the right people start coming, things snowball very quickly.
Now I'm going to throw a, well, first of all, I have to apologize. I won't bring my lizard propaganda next time. I'll keep that at home. But I'm going to throw a heavy question on you, but we're going to have you try to make it as pithy as possible because Jared has some great questions left, and we might be going a little bit over to make sure we get that important material covered. But I wanted to mention really quickly before we get to that big question, Theo Sign just financially gifted $25, writing, "Hail the folk," and thank you very much for that, dear friend. Roy Danton doing double duty today. Thank you so very much, Roy, financially gifting $25 and writing here, as a professional time traveler, I can tell you that episode 1000 of PWR was the very best of all time. We all held it in person in a large field. That sounds great. I can't wait. As long as there aren't any ticks there, let's pick someplace other than some parts of the United States. And finally, we have this question from Phil, who is financially gifting $10. Thank you very much, dear brother. Hello, all. One of the problems of Western society is that economy and infrastructure are now mainly controlled by globalist anti-whites. Do you think industry and finance can be loyal to European people? And if so, will it require stringent oversight by a nationalist government? Mark.
Stringent oversight by national. Can you just repeat that last bit, please, Jason?
Do you think industry and finance can be loyal to European people? And if so, will it require stringent oversight by a nationalist government?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I'm pleased it's been asked. And I'm going to answer it in an interesting way. It was only in the 1980s where we had regulation of credit in the UK. Now, if you wanted to attain credit in the UK, if you wanted to take a loan, you had to already prove that you were a person who could budget. So if you were, let's say, these are just figures that I'm throwing out. If you were taking home £1,000 a month, and every month you were saving £200, but you needed a loan to cover something, a loan that would be repaid at £100 a month, the bank would look at how much you were taking home, how much you were saving, how much you were putting aside, and they would turn around and say, well, this guy wants a loan, and he has to repay it at £100 a month, but he is already saving £200 every month anyway, so he's a guy that can afford this loan. Now, that soon changed, and the Thatcher administration in Britain started deregulating the banking sector and deregulating credit, something which she later actually admitted was a huge regret, and she said that it had done the country a lot of harm. She went on to privately admit to people that the deregulation of credit actually hadn't helped working class people. It had boosted the economy, it had boosted GDP, but it had brought a lot of misery. And I believe that we have had systems in the past which have regulated banking, which have regulated finance, that have regulated industry. And it's not a matter of reinventing the wheel. It's not a matter actually of doing something that's incredibly radical in this case. It's simply a matter of doing what has been done before. It's a matter of basically chaining the beast. Now, to draw a quick analogy, often you do want a vicious animal for reasons of maybe defense or reasons of safety or reasons of wanting a guard dog or something that would help you in that way. However, letting that animal off the leash would be disastrous to you also. So you keep the animal leashed. And that's a little bit like banking and finance. We do need banks. People need a medium of exchange. People do need a place to store their money. At times, people do need loans. People need loans for mortgages so they can buy a house. And sometimes there are reasons people need loans for other very legitimate reasons, maybe an extension on a house. Maybe they want to start a business. But the fact is, just like a very dangerous animal that might be there for good purposes, banks and the financial industries need to be chained. They need to be strictly monitored. They need to be absolutely shackled, because they are very, very dangerous. And they can be very dangerous if they're unleashed on the public. And what you have, specifically with banks and the financial services industries, is a situation where they are now completely unshackled, and they are running rampant, and they are biting so many people. So now, if you're a successful person who is putting aside a good amount of money every month and you want an extension, yeah, you should be able to take a loan if you can pay it back. But now we have people who are often the least well off, the least educated, taking loans which have an APR well in excess of 1,000%, and they don't understand what they're getting into, nor do they have the means to repay that loan. And all of this is so that we can grow GDP endlessly and build this credit-based society. Yes, we need to shackle these institutions. We need to get them under control. And the people controlling them must have the interests of society and our community at heart. If the people at the top of these institutions only think about short-term profitability, we will always lose. Do you want me to give you a great example of how short-term profitability destroys companies? There's a huge company in the UK called Debenhams. It's a high street chain. And they, not the current CEO, not the CEO before the current CEO, but the CEO before that, had at one time the best balance book on the whole high street. He was getting financial results that nobody on the high street could match. Sounds great, doesn't it? Does that sound great? Well, it's not, because he screwed the entire company. He got those results because Debenhams owned all the buildings that their stores operated from. And this guy, to make the bottom line look better, sold all of the buildings that Debenhams occupied, only for Debenhams to then rent the buildings from their new owners. So for a short period of time, there was this incredible bump in profitability because they'd sold all this real estate. But now Debenhams has just gone into administration for the second time. And one of the reasons is they can't afford to pay their rents. But they'd have never had that problem had a greedy CEO not gone for the quick route to profitability. So the books would look fantastic. So he would make his all his targets, get his fat bonus, and then leave. And that is short-term profitability over long-term stability. And when we build an economy, we will be looking at long-term stability. If that means lower rates of growth, if some years that means only a 0.05% rate of growth, but it's long-term stability, that is better than a 4-5% rate of growth built off the back of unsustainable credit, which not only means an economy based on sand, but also means untold misery to those who get into debt that they cannot service. And this ruins marriages, it ruins people's lives, it drives suicide, it drives despair, and eventually it leads to a massive economic collapse. So what I'm saying is, yes, we need industry. Yes, we do need financial services and a banking sector, but all of those industries and that entire financial services sector needs to absolutely be regulated by the state and shackled by a new financial authority services, which actually puts the people first. And to all the libertarians and to all the people who say that the capitalist society will sort it out, that it will all regulate itself and it will all find its own level, it is not finding its own level. And it has not found its own level, and it has got worse and worse the more regulations that we have removed. We need to regulate these banks. We need to regulate the money lenders and those that are pushing usury, those who are selling these loans that are at 1,000% APR. They need to be run out of business. And in some cases, the people need to be prosecuted. And men like the CEO of Debenhams that sold all the buildings and thus now has cost many people their jobs and has ruined a massive high street name and has basically caused uncertainty for hundreds and hundreds of people and hundreds of families. They need to be prosecuted. They don't need to be walking away with massive bonuses. Never again should massive bonuses be handed out to people who ultimately have failed. Because I don't know any other sector in the world where failure is met with a bonus other than in banking and finance. I remember when the banks collapsed in the UK and the government had to bail them out. Just after the government bailed them out with taxpayers' money, bankers and financiers were walking away with 5- and 6-figure bonuses. That's obscene and it's absurd. And the fact of the matter is, again, if I was to come to power tomorrow, all those who played any part in that would be prosecuted, and many people would be having a certain portion of their wealth seized because that wealth was stolen from the taxpayer. And that is completely unacceptable. When you have failed, you shouldn't be getting bonuses, and you certainly shouldn't be getting the bonuses out of the back pocket of men and women who risk losing all their savings because you screwed up the banks that they trusted. This is completely unacceptable. So in a nutshell, I hope I've explained that well, but the fact of the matter is, yes, there will be massive regulation. Yes, that will rein in short-term economic growth, but in the long term, it will give us an economy based on productive enterprise that will go the distance and will be far more stable, and it will remove the depression, the despair, and all the other problems that come from a credit-based society.
We're the people who believe in borders, right? We're the people who believe in boundaries. What in life doesn't have limits? Even art, they say some of the best art is made when there's limits, when there's not a lot of resources. Why would we want unfettered, no regulations, no limits on the financial sector? There needs to be freedoms and limits on everything with an eye on us as a people long-term, kind of speaking to what we were saying a little bit with the different strata of society earlier before. But when we have Mark on, we have people asking all kinds of questions. They want to pick your brain, get your perspective. People need this kind of articulation of what they're feeling inside, what they're confused about. Jason, did we have any more questions?
We do, but please jump right into what you...
I don't know how much time you have. We wanted to be wrapping up by around this time, but I did at least want to get to, and this isn't exactly a tiny subject, but as PA is growing and your profile is growing and the ideas that we believe in are being put out to the public for debate in wider circles not for the first time, but it's definitely getting to some new circles. We see things like the Anne-Marie Waters video, other people attacking you, some different ideas about something you spoke about earlier, which is repatriation, which is taking some of the population and moving them. There's a lot of confusion about that. So if we have time, if you have time, if not, we can have you back. As you said, Jason and I feel the same thing. There's so many people to talk to and so many ideas. It's hard to do. Only in our case, we do about a couple streams a week at this point. But what are the main misconceptions, and what would you like to address about some of the attacks, specifically with this whole repatriation idea?
I can actually answer this in a very unconventional or un-Mark Collett-like way, because I often give very long-winded answers to these things and try to be comprehensive.
Keep people on their toes. So
I'm going to throw this one. I'm going to try and wrap this up rather quickly. I find it rather ironic that a woman like Anne-Marie Waters has such a problem with the idea of Britain having a repatriation scheme when she so vehemently supports the state of Israel, which has a similar repatriation scheme. The only difference is, number one, the state of Israel has actually begun sterilizing migrants, and number two, the state of Israel's financial incentives for migrants to leave are far, far less generous than the ones that myself and Laura proposed. So my answer is this, or my question to Anne-Marie Waters is this. Anne-Marie Waters, why do you think that it would be so objectionable for the British government to offer generous financial incentives of £15,000 per migrant or per ethnic minority individual for them to go back to their ancestral homelands? Why do you think that's so objectionable? Why do you think that will cause wars, will lead to trade embargoes, when you support a nation, namely Israel, that has a much, much harsher policy, and in some ways a genocidal policy, because it involves the sterilization of migrants and much, much lower financial incentives? And I think that's, again, another hypocrisy of these civic nationalists. On one hand, civic nationalists don't believe that we have a right to exist on an ethnic level, or if they claim that we do have a right, they will not do anything to protect us as an ethnic group, whilst on the other hand, they constantly run around squawking at the top of their voice about the rights of Israel and the rights of those within Israel to protect their ethnic group.
Did you want to follow that, Jared?
No, I was just saying, there it is. I'm waiting for you to get in. So we have a few more questions, Jason, or statements that came in. So why don't we hear from people out in the chat?
We have two from Alt Fit, and the first one here is £5 hurled over the Great Pond, writing, "Hello, friends. I hope you are keeping well. The weather here is beautiful, and many women are, I don't know if that necessarily translates to American English. I'll say they're showing skin. Good times. So I guess that's they are. You know, they're showing their arms and legs off a bit, wearing a few less clothes as we see here in the spring and summer as well. And it is always a good time when that happens." We also have Alt Fit writing with 5 more pounds. Thank you very much, dear friend. And here saying, "The ongoing destruction of currency is due to the mass printing of money. The more notes in circulation, the less the value of the individual denomination. This only gets worse with a digital currency." Mark, did you have any thoughts to that, or Jared, that you would like to give to that statement?
I think we have to always remember that money exists as a medium of exchange. It exists to serve the economy, and the economy should exist to serve the people. But at the moment, we have reversed that very common sense statement. So now people exist to serve the economy, and the economy exists only to grow an ever larger pile of money. And we worship that money as if it were our God, yet it is bringing us nothing but misery, because the fact of the matter is, all that money should be is a simple way for us to exchange goods and services, not our God, not our master, not something that we are willing to give our lives for.
Very well said. We do have a question specifically from Mestizo here saying, "Your thoughts on propaganda in children's entertainment. Examples include," these are all just anti-white propaganda, "interracial gay couples," and Gravity Falls, and Bella and the Bulldogs, written by the author of, quote, "The Cuckold." So this is your thoughts on anti-white propaganda in children's entertainment, particularly pernicious, of course, because it is sneaking in at a time when you're able to convince these little adults to be that Easter bunnies hop into their houses and fat men come down their chimneys. So Mark, what do you have to say to that? And then we'll get Jared's thoughts on that as well.
I think children's television is the most propagandized of all television. There is more propaganda in films, television shows aimed at children than there is in the rest of media. And it's because they know children are so impressionable. And you can see this when you watch children's TV. And you see it mainly with the presenters. You will always find the alpha male of the presenters is always non-white. The female, the pretty woman, is always white. And if there is a white male, he is either the beta, or he is a homosexual, or there is something about him that makes him less physically imposing and less likely to win the heart of the pretty girl than the non-white male. That's always the setup. Now, another interesting thing, and you see this all the time, and it's not just in the media, actually, it's also in books, but I've seen this with my daughter. We get free books. We go to events and we get free books, and we get some that are really charming. We have a little book that's called Chuffa Chuffa Choo Choo, and it's about a little train that goes to all these different places, and as the train travels around and visits these different places, different birds that live in the places sit on the train, and eventually when the train gets back to the station at the end of the night, he wants to go to sleep because he's so tired, but all the birds keep chattering away and they have to be shooed off so the little train can sleep and make his journey the next day. And that's very harmless. It's a nice book. But then we get other books, and this one particularly appalled me. It's called Car Truck Jeep. Now, Car Truck Jeep is a book which is meant to replace Bar Black Sheep. It's sang to the same tune as Bar Black Sheep, because apparently Bar Black Sheep is racist because it talks about the black sheep, which separates the black sheep from the white sheep based on the color of its it's not fur, is it? Wool. And the wool is actually interesting about this is the black sheep was actually the superior sheep in many ways, because back in the day, most sheep were white, so white wool had to be dyed. But if you had a black sheep, the wool was actually more expensive because it didn't need dyeing. And once it had been made into a garment, the color never ran because it was the natural color of the wool. So when the song talks about Bar Black Sheep, have you any wool? The song is actually about the little boy going to the sheep and asking if he's got wool, because people actually valued the black sheep more. There's no racial connotations. The black sheep isn't worse. It's not a white supremacist song, but people don't sing it anymore in school. So it's been replaced by this stupid car truck Jeep. But not only has car truck Jeep replaced Bar Black Sheep, but when you look at the illustrations in the book, every car, truck, and Jeep in the book is absolutely full of people who aren't of European descent or full of mixed race families. And there is actually, whereas there wasn't a racial narrative to Bar Black Sheep, there is an absolute racial undercurrent to car truck Jeep. So it's not just on TV, it's not just in the media, it's not just in films, it's not just in shows, it's not just in mock documentaries which force other racial groups into European history, but it's also in these free books that are given to children at library events. And we obviously screen these books. So Sophia's favorites are Where's Mrs. Bear, Fox's Socks, and I do like Chuffa Chuffa Choo Choo. It's a nice little book. But car truck Jeep has gone on the scrap heap, so to speak. But it is everywhere. And they do push these things because children are far more impressionable. And beware of this. This is the last thing I'll say about this. Beware of this. Our enemies will always deal with this in a very interesting way. They mock us. They say, don't you realize it's just fiction? Oh, can't you tell the difference? Doctor Who isn't real. Yeah. We know Doctor Who isn't real. But if you repeatedly place fictional characters in a historical perspective, that historical perspective, if incorrect, if the historical context those people are placed in is incorrect and is done repeatedly, children will say, well, I know Doctor Who's not real, but Victorian England is. And when he visits Victorian England and it's almost completely non-white, they grew up believing Victorian England is completely non-white. It might be a fantasy story about Vikings, but if a third of the Vikings aren't of European descent, our children understand that the story is made up, but they think the historical parts are actually true. And that is the damaging thing. And they want to get in early. They want to get into your children's heads when your children are young, because they know if they plant all these seeds early enough, it is much harder for us to reverse the conditioning.
I'll just briefly add to what Mark said, that nothing is neutral. That we have to keep in mind nothing is neutral. If we don't keep our foot on the gas and we're doing things about us, for us, by us, imbued with our biospirit, then this is what happens, especially in a multiracial culture, there's no such thing as neutral. There's no such thing as just an open, neutral space. Someone is going to come to fill it, and this is what happens. So unplug from that. Either support our new artists. There's a lot of culture merging. We talked a little about that tonight. Jason and I offer on that. You can start with the links to peers page on our site, on our shared site, theafterparty.tv. Mark is there with links to his books. Laura's We Were Never Asked. Other kinds of cultural works are there too. That page is not about links to news sites or content creators per se. It's about content creators who are offering something that you might not know about. Like anyone that listens to Mark's show knows about his book, but maybe you're new to him. Maybe you know Survive the Jive, but you don't know that he has an animated Yule book. So we collected all kinds of things like that. Also, not in lieu of that, it should be in addition to that, just go back to the amazing lore and all the stories that we have from the last 1,000 years, 2,000 years of European culture, fairy tales, folk tales. Don't forget about that. But quick thoughts on that. And back to Jason. Like I said, we always have so many questions when Mark is here.
Well, it's been a magnificent, absolutely riveting show. Everybody has been saying there's been such great energy here tonight. So I think what we'll do is we'll take a look at these. We got two final gifts. And first is Roy Danton. And then we will wrap the show up for tonight. Roy Danton financially gifting $25 more, doing double duty tonight as he is also moderating. Thank you, my dear brother and friend. And writing, to anyone who might be black-pilled, just look at how much amazing progress we've already done. To another amazing 50 episodes of PWR. Thank you very much, Roy. That is fantastic. And we have Alt Fit coming in again with another one heck of an arm on this guy, hurling these British pounds all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. 4 more of them. Thank you very much. Mark, try your little one on, what is this? Enid Blyton's Brer Rabbit. Is this right? They're great, wholesome stories with zero degeneracy. Have you seen these books, Mark?
I have, and we've been gifted some lovely books by people. We have one of fairy tales. They're a bit old for at the moment. We have one of dark fairy tales from the East Midlands, which somebody gave me, a very generous man gave me at a conference, and we have read a couple of those to her, even though she's a bit too young for them. And we do like story time with her. And I'm at the moment, she's very much in the phase where she likes books where you open a little compartment or reveal a little character from behind a felt piece. And she's only, she's pushing 9 months old now, but we want her to be into reading. We like taking walks with her, and we will be following up with traditional things for her and doing our best to keep her away from all of the poison that's being poured down for our children. And that's what it is. It is poison, and you have to look at the people poisoning our children as what they are as well, because anyone that wants to poison the minds of children are truly, truly sick people. And that is what these people are doing. They are, one thing you have to remember about our enemies, and this is, again, what separates me from the Civ Nats. I had a big argument with the leaders of Generation Identity in the UK. I fell out with them, and they're gone now. And I am still here for however long I am required to be here before you all get sick of me. And I remember looking at Generation Identity's analysis of the problems, and Generation Identity were always very eager to say that there were problems, but the problems came about by error, by good-meaning people doing the wrong things, that there was no one really to blame, that there was always error, but there was never malice aforethought. And that's what separates people like myself from these Civ Nats. It's another thing that separates myself from the Civ Nats. I don't think Boris Johnson is a bumbling idiot. I don't think Tony Blair was a man who made mistakes and got it wrong. I don't think Theresa May was somebody who was not qualified enough to run the Home Office and manage immigration. I believe all three are calculating, lying, vile anti-whites who didn't make a series of errors, but made a series of anti-white decisions. And the difference between us and the Civ Nats is that we don't live in a cotton wool world where we believe that those destroying our people are just doing it because they're good meaning people who made mistakes. We're big enough to detach from the matrix and say that the people doing this to us are our enemies, and we have to treat them as such.
Very well said. And keep talking, Mark. Let us know what you're working on, where folks can find you, and everything moving forward that you have ahead of you.
Well, at the moment, we're working on several things. Myself and Laura are working towards a homeschooling group. I'm looking forward to doing more work on that. I'm continuing to work on my videos. I've had a very busy day today. I was on Dr. David Duke's show earlier this afternoon. I've done a couple of hours with you guys, and I've got an hour with Henrik from Red Ice Radio later. I've got an appearance on Saturday. I think it's with a group called White Rabbit Radio. I might be mistaken there. If I've got the name wrong, my apologies. Oh, I am right then. I'm always very busy with very many things, and I'm always busy helping people as well who have a range of issues, and I'm always doing my best, beavering away in the background, doing something productive for our people. And if you haven't seen, I've got a video out today all about the migrant issue and the fact that whilst we're in our homes, these people are flooding in to take our jobs. And I'm, as I say, always up to many things, and I am very, very much looking forward to an event later in the year, our autumn conference, because that should be a bit of a tour de force. We've got some great speakers, and it should be a good event, because I can't wait for this lockdown to be over, because as soon as the lockdown is over, I and Laura will be coming out of the gates at 100 miles an hour to set up groups all over the UK. So in the future, you won't just have to look forward to one or two conferences a year, but you will have regular meetings in your region that you can attend, so you don't feel isolated, so you can feel part of a much more localized and active community.
Mr. George.
Well, look at that. 2 weeks ago, Jason was hosting Flashback Friday, co-hosting. I was last week, and it sounds like, Mark, you're later with Henrik on Flashback Friday, so I like that. We have I got a bit of a plug mentioning Red Ice. Mark spoke beautifully earlier in the stream to our idea of freedom, and pretty soon I'll have my 5th Red Ice feature out. I do a series for them, for anyone that doesn't know, of original videos. I work with Henrik, so he helps make them look all beautiful and polished, but that'll be coming out soon on our people's conception of freedom. It is a bit of a tough topic to hone in for an under 10-minute video, but gives us some things to think about, especially in this time of the plague. And then, Mark, you mentioned the Matrix, and I'm glad that you did, because we were all on Frody Midyear's Guide to Culture series recently, so please check that out as well. Jason and I were on earlier this week, and we did, in fact, speak about The Matrix, a film that's given us a lot of metaphors and has affected our language. But we give you a way to think about it now. And Mark, I listened to some of yours on Goodfellas. I was enjoying that. I like how you talked about how the story is told visually. I've seen that film a few times myself and was enjoying hearing your thoughts on that. But always good to speak to you. This was a lot of fun tonight. And anyone who wants to look into what I'm doing, both the video content and otherwise, my site is thegreatorder.com. So that's a catalog of everything that I do and ways to support, keep in touch, all that good stuff. And as mentioned, Jason and I have a shared site, theafterparty.tv. It's all the shows that we do, all the streams. It's laid out very visually, so you can just scroll or go to the specific shows, search. You type in Mark Collett, you see the other times Mark's been on, or you type in Britain or UK or Patriotic Alternative. Everything is very well tagged. You'll see the shows that come up with those topics as well. Everybody, please, I know most of you are watching on YouTube, but seriously, we all know we can't be on YouTube forever. Please do go to our site, get in the habit of watching the show live on the site. You can actually watch it embedded right on the site while we're live. We also have the alt tech platforms listed there too, but we really, really do need you to change some of your habits, follow us, get into a new habit, tell other people about it, share the information. We cannot rely on YouTube. We don't know what's going to happen one day to the next with them. but we do know we all are going to be here together doing this, fighting for our people, creating a new future. That's what it's all about. And it's an honor and pleasure to serve with all of you. So with having said that, Jason, take us out.
Amen. I will very quickly say a big thank you to Mark. It is always a deep pleasure to be able to serve White Wellbeing with you, good sir. And we thank you deeply for your service to our people. There will be a great many lives that will be saved and preserved because of the work that you are doing. Let me also thank Ray, Roy, and Seaver, who were here modding today, protecting us from all of those unsavory elements that slither around the internet and elsewhere. Thank you all three very much for your service. And I will spotlight Simon Coates today. Saw him in the live chat. Patriotic Talk #2. Saw you as well. Lisa Zoller and Full Natty Bro, as well as Kimberly and Stag's Head. We're all here. I saw in the chat. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank everybody for commenting and participating today. Those who are here live watching and those who will be watching in replay, you will be able to find Mark all over the place. He's growing and getting bigger and stronger. And we have one final financial gift from Wayne Scully, $5 US. Thank you, dear friend, in writing. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service to White Wellbeing. You are all an inspiration. I love watching PWR and TAP. I look forward to each stream every single week. And those are some perfect words to close the show on today. Thank you so much, Wayne. And we look forward to seeing you all again next time.